So I've gotten the top and the back out of clamps. You saw me joint them and glue them together in the last video, and now I need to thickness them. If you remember, one side of this top was a bit thicker than the other side, and I glued it up so that I would have one side that was flush, and then the other side, which would be the back side or the inside of the top, would have one side that was higher than the other. And so the goal here now is, first of all, to make that side come down to an evenness with the other side of the soundboard. And this is simply a matter of planing that one side until it comes down to the same thickness. It's a little more complicated than that because you have to account for grain direction. This grain direction will be opposite of the other side of the top. And if you look at the way that I'm cutting with the plane is not going straight up and down. It's at an angle, at like a 45. Now you see that I'm moving to the other side because I brought the thickness down now, and now I want to continue to refine the thickness of this entire top. And you'll see I'm always doing some kind of semi-cross grain, like a 45-degree angle with the blade. That minimizes tear out, but it doesn't completely prevent it. You need a really, really sharp plane blade, and you need the blade to be very, very lightly out of the top. You don't want to take a heavy cut, you want to take light cuts. And you see I'm turning the top around so that I can plane the other side. Most guitar builders nowadays, at least steel string acoustic guitars, will use a machine to do this called a thickness sander or thickness planer, or whatever you want to call it. I don't have one of those, number one. I don't have a big shop and all of that, but you don't have to have all of that. Now you see I'm going more straight now, but that's because I know what the direction of that grain is. See? And I'm trying to make the outside edges agree with the thickness of the center. But back to what I was saying is, you really don't need all of those power tools. There was a time when I first started building that I came on a couple of the guitar building forums and said, you know, you guys have all these power tools, all these 4 standing units and all of this stuff, and you know, isn't there a way to build guitars that doesn't require all that? And most people said, yeah, you can do it by hand, yada, yada, yada. But there was always this one fella that came on and said, well, if you cannot afford the tool, then you need to find another hobby. No. Now you see me here sanding. It's smooth, but also I'm going to use the sander to take the top down to closer to the dimensions that I want. But they've been building guitars for hundreds of years, okay? Before anybody ever invented a wall socket and a plug that you plug into it. And there you see me checking thickness again. One of the things that I have understood or come to understood as I looked at things that I wanted to learn is that if you have a will to do something, you can find a way. There are workarounds for almost everything. And also, honestly, if you look at some of the old world craftsmanship, there were people that were doing almost anything you can think of that we do today, particularly with wood. They were doing it with hand tools. Now I'm checking the top and listening to how it sounds and all of that because I'm trying to learn the relationship to the sound of the top and the back plates when I tap them, and whether or not I think they're going to be musical. And what I'm really listening for more than anything else is sort of a bell-like sound and some sustain going on. And now you see I'm working the back plate, the maple. This is much harder to do. And once again, the sides were uneven. This is normal. There's nothing wrong in that. This wood is absolutely gorgeous. And I am incredibly blessed to have it. But yeah, the maple's harder. And you really do have to be really careful how much of a bite you take. You really need your plane blade to be sharp. And what I did was I adjusted the frog on the plane. And what that is it's the angled piece of metal that the blade lays on that puts it at an angle to cut with. And you can unscrew 2 screws that fix that frog to the base of the plane, and then turn another screw and it will slide that frog forward or back. And what I did was I moved that as close as I could to the outside mouth of the plane bottom and still have enough room to allow my blade to come through, so that I've got as closed of a plane mouth as I can. Now I know a lot of you guys aren't going to understand that, but basically what you're doing is you're closing up the hole that the blade comes through on the sole of the plane, so that there's very little room for chips and stuff to pass. And what that does is it helps the plane not to take really heavy cuts. And it takes longer, but with something like this maple that is flamed, it's got from what I can see, it's got a really pretty subtle type of figure in it. But as I put finish on it, I don't know, it could be a whole lot more than I think it's on there. But it's a beautiful piece of wood, but that flame or that figure makes the grain interlock with each other, and so the wood fibers will tear out if you're too aggressive with the cut. And moving that frog forward helps to ease that somewhat, but you're still going to get some tear out, or I am with a hand plane. I ain't that good yet. That's just how that is. But what I will do is I will do the same thing I did with the top, and you see me here working the sander. And I'm checking for thickness. I'm going to bring this back to the thickness that I'm looking for, but what I'm also doing is I'm going to work on the inside of the back, just like I worked on the inside of the top. That way all the tear out and marks that I cannot get off will be to the inside of the instrument and won't show as much. That's the hope anyway. And previously I sanded what would be the outer face of these plates with that random orbit sander you see me using here, so that they were nice and smooth at least to start with, a smoothness that I was good with. And I won't touch those surfaces unless I do work on them. For instance, the top, I will have to do some type of rosette around the sound hole, and that will be inlaid proud, and then I will have to scrape or plane or chisel or sand them flush, that rosette flush, and that will take a bit of material off the face of the top of the instrument. And so you have to, one of the biggest mistakes that I made on the first one is that I didn't account for how much thickness would be taken off in those operations, and I did not leave the top thick enough, and because of that, in my opinion, the top got a bit too thin. The instrument still sounds fantastic, it still plays really well, but it needed to be a little bit more thicker than it ended up being, and with this one I'm going to attempt to improve on that. And you see, once again, that 45-degree angle. I sanded a bit and it's not thin enough for me yet, so I'm going to go back with the plane again and take the bulk of the material off and then come back with the sander, and it's just a process until I get what I want for the stage of building that I'm at the moment. And I don't know, even if I had the money and the space, a nice space for a shop and all of that, I'm not even sure that I would ever get something like a thickness sander or anything like that. Doing this with my hands, using a hand plane, all of that kind of stuff, I love it. And the thing of it is, people will say, well, you can get a lot more precise with a thickness sander. Yeah, maybe. But I also know that there are men out there, woodworkers out there, that can get pretty dead blame precise with a hand plane. And I've got no problem spending the time and learning how to do that. This is the Hand Tool Wood Guy YouTube channel. Anyway, there's a reason that I named it that. I love hand tools and wood. Checking the thickness again to bring it close to what I want. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some naphtha on the surface and try to show you what the figure might look like, the wood might look like under finish. In my opinion, looking at the footage back, I didn't do as good of a job as I would have liked to. It didn't show, rather. It's not a matter of me doing a good job. It didn't show as well as I would have liked to on the camera. But this will give you an idea of what the wood will look like under finish. This is going to be a gorgeous instrument. Thank you for watching. Bless you. And I'll talk to you later.